The afternoon sun was warm, and the park was full of life. Children were laughing on the swings, mothers were chatting on the benches, and joggers moved quickly along the paths. Among the crowd, a young woman walked slowly, enjoying a rare moment of peace after a tiring week. She had been busy with work applications, household responsibilities, and family expectations. Her mind was always full, but today she allowed herself to take a break and breathe in the fresh air. She liked to observe the world around her, watching people pass by with their own stories, their own worries, and their own joys. She noticed a man walking just a few steps ahead of her. He was pushing a stroller, carefully guiding it over the paved path. A little child sat inside, holding a colorful toy, smiling and playing with it. The young woman thought it was a sweet picture. The man seemed calm, though he looked a little tired, as if his day had already been long. She guessed he might be a father who had taken his child out to give the mother some rest. She admired such men quietly in her heart, those who gave time to their children no matter how busy life became. As she walked, she saw something slip out of the child's tiny hands. A small toy car rolled to the side of the path and landed near her feet. The child made a soft sound, almost like a protest, when the toy was gone. The man did not notice, he was focused on steering the stroller around a curve. Without a second thought, the young woman bent down, picked up the toy, and called out politely. "Excuse me," she said, her voice gentle but clear. The man stopped and turned his head. Their eyes met for the first time. He looked surprised, and then he noticed the toy in her hand. "This fell," she explained, extending it toward him. The man smiled in relief and gratitude. "Oh, thank you," he said warmly. He reached for the toy, but before he could take it, the child leaned forward, tiny hands eager to grab it back. The young woman smiled at the child, holding the toy a little closer, and the little one's fingers wrapped around it tightly. The simple gesture made the child giggle, and the sound made her heart soften. The father gave a small laugh too, the kind that comes from watching your child happy. "I really appreciate it," he said again. "Kids keep dropping things, and somehow I never notice in time." "It's no problem at all," she replied. "He's adorable." The man nodded with a tired but genuine smile. For a brief moment, they stood there, strangers connected by a simple act of kindness. Then, as quickly as the moment came, it passed. The man adjusted the stroller, nodded politely again, and continued walking down the path. She stayed still for a second, watching them leave, the little boy now busy again with his toy. She thought about how life was full of such small encounters. People crossed paths for a few seconds, shared a smile, or exchanged a kind word, and then went on with their lives. Often those moments were forgotten, hidden among countless others. She did not know why this one stayed with her. Perhaps it was the innocence in the child's smile or the gratitude in the father's eyes. Or maybe it was simply that she hadn't expected anything interesting to happen that afternoon, yet something small and pleasant had brightened her day. As she continued walking, she reflected on her own life. She was at a stage where she was searching for something stable career-wise and emotionally. Recently, she had applied for a new job. The interview had gone well, but she hadn't heard back yet. She felt restless, unsure of what her future would look like. Small moments like these, when she helped someone or connected with a stranger, reminded her that life was unpredictable. Anything could happen, even when you least expected it. She walked toward a bench and sat down, letting the soft breeze play with her hair. Her eyes wandered across the park, but her mind kept returning to the father and child. She wondered what his life was like beyond that stroller. Did he rush from meeting to meeting at work, then come home to spend time with his child? Did he carry heavy responsibilities, yet still find time for family? She admired the thought. Sometimes she wished her own life had more balance like that. Little did she know, This stranger was not just a passing figure in her story. Fate had already written something unexpected for her. In the moment, she could not see it. To her, it was simply an ordinary good deed. But that small act of picking up a toy had quietly placed her on a path she never could have imagined. The man, too, walked away thinking about her kindness. He was used to people ignoring small things. Few bothered to pick up a toy that didn't belong to them. Yet she had done it with a smile, without hesitation. He appreciated that more than he showed. Life as a working parent was exhausting, and small gestures of kindness felt like gentle reminders that there were still thoughtful people around. They did not know each other's names. They did not know each other's backgrounds. They did not even expect to meet again. But sometimes life arranges meetings not by chance but by design. The toy that slipped out of the child's hands was not just a toy, it was a quiet signal of the story yet to unfold. As she finally stood up and left the park, her heart was lighter than before. She carried a small smile with her, not knowing why. It was just a tiny incident, but it had touched her. She did not know that in the coming weeks, her life would change in ways she could not yet imagine. The morning was fresh, but her heart was racing with nervousness. It was her first day at a new job, and she wanted everything to go right. She had prepared carefully the night before, pressed her clothes, packed her bag, and even reviewed her notes one more time about the company she was joining. She knew it was an important opportunity, one that could give her career the stability she had been searching for. As she stepped into the office building, she took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. The lobby was large, full of people walking in and out, carrying files, talking on their phones, or greeting each other. She followed the directions given to her and reached the reception desk, where she introduced herself. The receptionist smiled warmly and guided her toward the orientation room. Her footsteps echoed softly in the hallway, and she felt both excitement and nervousness building inside her. When she entered the room, a few other new employees were already seated, chatting quietly among themselves. She chose a chair near the corner, opened her notebook, and tried to look calm. Inside, she was replaying all the advice she had been given: smile, listen carefully, work hard, and make a good impression. Soon, the room became quiet as the door opened again. A group of senior staff entered, ready to welcome the new hires. Then it happened. Her eyes widened, her breath caught for a second, and her heart skipped a beat. Leading the group was a man she recognized instantly, the same man from the park, the one whose child had dropped a toy and whose polite smile had stayed in her mind. She blinked, almost not believing what she was seeing. He was dressed smartly in a suit, looking confident and professional. His presence commanded attention as he greeted everyone with a polite but firm voice. He was introduced as the new director of the division. Suddenly, everything felt surreal to her. She had met him as an ordinary father in the park, pushing a stroller and thanking her for a toy. And now, here he was, standing in front of her as her boss. She sat still, trying not to let her surprise show on her face. He welcomed the new employees warmly, speaking about the company's goals, the importance of teamwork, and the values they believed in. His voice was steady, clear, and filled with authority. She listened carefully, still amazed by the strange twist of fate. She wondered if he remembered her. Did he recognize her as the stranger who had handed back the toy? Or was that small park moment forgotten in his busy life? When his eyes moved around the room, briefly pausing on each person, she felt a sudden rush of nervousness. For a split second, their eyes met, but his expression remained professional, giving no sign of recognition. She quickly looked down at her notebook, her mind filled with thoughts. Maybe he didn't remember. Or maybe he did, but chose not to show it here. Either way, she decided it was best to focus on her new role and not get distracted. After the introductions, the day was filled with orientation activities, presentations, and meetings with team leaders. She tried her best to absorb everything, making notes and paying close attention. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't stop thinking about the coincidence. Life had brought her into contact with him twice, in such different settings. The first time, he was just a father in the park. Now, he was her boss, someone who would have a direct influence on her career. During lunch break, she sat with a few other new employees. They chatted about their backgrounds, their previous jobs, and their hopes for the future. She smiled and joined the conversation, but part of her attention was still elsewhere. She caught glimpses of him across the cafeteria, speaking with senior staff. He carried himself with confidence, his posture straight, his tone calm but commanding. She realized this was a man who knew how to balance authority and responsibility. As the day went on, she had her first introduction to her department. She was assigned to a small team, where she would be working on projects directly connected to his division. That realization made her even more determined to do well. She knew first impressions mattered, and she wanted him to see her as capable and hardworking, not just another new hire. When the afternoon session ended, he came into the room to meet the team. Everyone stood as he entered, and the atmosphere shifted immediately. People spoke with more care, their tone more respectful. He asked each person to briefly introduce themselves. When it was her turn, she stood, introduced her name, her background, and her previous experience. He listened attentively, nodding slightly. She noticed his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than with others, as if something about her seemed familiar. She sat down, her heart beating faster. Did he remember? She couldn't be sure. But there was something in his gaze, a flicker of recognition that came and went too quickly for her to be certain. The day finally ended, and she walked out of the building with a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. The city air felt different, as if she had stepped into a new chapter of her life. She replayed everything in her mind: the introductions, the projects, and most of all, the moment she saw him walk into the room. Life had a strange way of connecting people. A small act in a park had unknowingly tied her path to his. She smiled quietly to herself as she walked home. It was only the beginning of her journey in this company. She did not know what challenges or opportunities lay ahead. But one thing she was sure of: this was no ordinary coincidence. Meeting him again in such an unexpected way felt like life was preparing her for something greater, something she could not yet imagine. And though he had not mentioned it, though he had not yet shown it, deep inside, she had a feeling he had recognized her too. The first few weeks at the new company were full of challenges. Every morning she arrived early, sometimes before most of her colleagues, and every evening she left late, carrying her notes and unfinished tasks in her bag. She wanted to prove herself, not just to the team but also to him, the director who had once been a stranger in the park. Each day, she reminded herself that her position here was not a gift, it was earned through her skills, and she had to show that she deserved it. The projects assigned to her were not easy. There were reports to prepare, presentations to draft, and deadlines that seemed to arrive too quickly. At times she felt overwhelmed, but she refused to show it. She believed that hard work spoke louder than words, and if she remained consistent, people would notice. Slowly, her team members began to see her as reliable. Whenever there was extra work, she volunteered. Whenever someone struggled, she offered help. She became known for her positive attitude, even when the workload was heavy. Yet, despite all her efforts, she often found herself watching him from a distance. In meetings, he spoke with clarity and confidence. His instructions were direct, and his expectations were high. He did not waste time with unnecessary talk, he valued results. Many employees admired him, but some also found him intimidating. His sharp eyes and serious tone sometimes made people nervous, and it was clear that he did not tolerate carelessness. She, too, felt that pressure. Every time he walked into the room, the atmosphere changed. People sat straighter, chose their words carefully, and made sure their work was in order. She tried to do the same, but inside, she often wondered if he remembered her as the woman who had picked up the toy in the park. He had never mentioned it, never given any hint, and that left her curious. One afternoon, she was asked to prepare a small report for a meeting he would attend. She spent hours on it, double-checking every detail, making sure the information was clear and well presented. When the time came, she handed it to her team leader, who placed it on the table during the meeting. She sat quietly, listening as he flipped through the pages. For a moment, her heart beat faster, afraid of what he might say. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Who prepared this?" he asked. Her team leader pointed toward her. She felt a rush of nervousness as his eyes shifted to her. He nodded slowly, then said, "Good work. Clear and concise. Keep it up." It was just a few words, but to her, they meant everything. It was the first time he had acknowledged her work directly, and the approval in his voice gave her a new kind of confidence. She left that meeting with a smile she could not hide. She realized that sometimes, even a short compliment from the right person could motivate you to work harder than ever before. As the weeks turned into months, she began to understand his style of leadership. He believed in discipline, but he was also fair. He demanded effort, but he rewarded results. Slowly, she earned his trust. He started giving her small but important tasks, things that required responsibility. At first, she worried that he was testing her, waiting for her to fail. But as time passed, she saw that he genuinely believed she could handle them. One evening, the office was quieter than usual. Most of the staff had left, but she was still at her desk, finishing up a presentation. She didn't notice when he entered the room until he stopped beside her table. She looked up quickly, surprised. "You're still here," he said. "Yes," she replied, trying to sound calm. "I just wanted to make sure everything is ready for tomorrow's meeting." He studied her work for a moment, then nodded. "You're thorough. That's good. But remember, balance is important. Don't burn yourself out." His words caught her off guard. She had expected a reminder about deadlines or precision, not advice about balance. She smiled politely. "I'll keep that in mind." As he walked away, she realized that beneath his strict exterior, there was a side of him that cared about the well-being of his team. It made her respect him even more. Over time, she noticed other small gestures that revealed his character. He would stay calm even during stressful situations, guiding the team instead of blaming them. He remembered small details about his employees, like who had children or who was working extra hours. He was demanding, yes, but he was also human. And she found herself admiring that balance more than she had expected. Still, she kept wondering if he had truly recognized her from that day in the park. She remembered the way his child had smiled at her, the way he had laughed softly when she handed the toy back. She wanted to ask him, to remind him of that moment, but she hesitated. It felt unprofessional to bring up something so personal in the workplace. So, she kept it to herself, waiting for the right time. One day, while working on a joint project, she had to present her ideas in front of him and a few senior colleagues. She stood in the conference room, her hands slightly trembling as she held her notes. But when she began to speak, her voice grew steady. She explained her ideas with clarity, using simple but strong points. She noticed him watching her carefully, his expression serious but attentive. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then, to her relief, he nodded. "Well done," he said. "That's the kind of thinking we need." The approval in his tone gave her a sense of pride she had never felt before. For the first time, she realized that he didn't just see her as another employee. He saw her potential. And that realization changed everything. From then on, he began involving her more in discussions. He asked for her opinion during meetings, and when others spoke, he sometimes turned to her and asked what she thought. At first, she was nervous, but slowly she gained confidence. She began to trust her own voice. The respect he showed her gave her courage, and she worked even harder to meet his expectations. But it wasn't just about work. She noticed how her respect for him grew beyond the office walls. She admired the way he balanced his professional life with his role as a father. Sometimes, when he mentioned his child in casual conversation, his expression softened, and she was reminded again of the day in the park. That memory, though unspoken, connected them in a way she couldn't explain. She did not know what the future held, but one thing was clear: her life had changed since joining this company. She was no longer just another employee trying to prove herself. She was part of a story that had begun with a toy falling from a stroller, a story that was only beginning to unfold. The months passed quickly, and the office began to feel like a second home to her. The early nervousness that had once filled her every morning was replaced with determination and confidence. She had built her place in the team, and little by little, she had earned the trust of her colleagues. But the most meaningful change was the silent shift in her connection with him. He was still her boss, still the respected director, but something about the way he treated her began to feel different. It wasn't favoritism, it was trust. He often asked for her input during discussions, sometimes even before asking others. At first, she thought it was just coincidence, but over time, she realized he genuinely valued her perspective. She noticed how he listened carefully when she spoke, nodding as though each word mattered. That acknowledgement made her feel stronger, more confident than she had ever felt in her career before. The bond between them didn't form overnight. It grew quietly, in small moments that no one else noticed. One evening, after a long meeting, she stayed back to organize the files. Everyone else had already left, but she didn't mind. The office was calm at night, and she found peace in finishing her tasks without the usual noise around. As she was about to leave, she saw him standing near the window of the conference room, looking outside at the city lights. She hesitated for a second but then softly said, "You're still here." He turned his head slightly, and a small smile appeared on his face. "I could ask the same about you." She laughed quietly. "I had to finish the reports." "You work too hard," he replied. "You should know when to stop." "I'll remember that," she said, and then, for a moment, they both stood in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, it felt natural, as though they didn't need words to fill the air. The city lights reflected on the glass behind him, and she thought about how life was full of strange surprises. The silence broke when he spoke again, his tone lighter than usual. "Do you ever think about how small actions can change things?" She tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" He looked thoughtful. "Like, how one small decision, one moment, can affect everything afterward." She smiled softly, though her heart was racing. She thought instantly of the park, of the toy she had picked up and handed back to him. The memory was so clear in her mind that she almost mentioned it. But she stopped herself, unsure if this was the right time. Instead, she simply said, "Yes, I think about that sometimes. Life has a way of surprising us." He nodded, his eyes thoughtful, as if he too had something unspoken on his mind. Then he gathered his files and said, "Well, don't stay too late. Tomorrow is another long day." She nodded, watching him leave, and wondered again if he remembered. The connection between them continued to grow, not through grand gestures but through small, consistent moments. When she presented ideas, he asked questions that encouraged her to think deeper. When the team faced challenges, he trusted her to handle key responsibilities. And when things went wrong, he supported her, reminding her that mistakes were part of learning. One afternoon, during a particularly busy week, She was working late on a presentation for an upcoming project. She was so focused on her screen that she didn't hear him approach until he placed a cup of coffee on her desk. She looked up, surprised. "You'll need it," he said with a small smile. She laughed softly. "Thank you. I guess I do." It was a simple act, but it spoke volumes. He wasn't just a boss handing out tasks, he was someone who noticed the effort his team put in, someone who quietly encouraged them to keep going. That coffee became more than just a drink, it was a sign of acknowledgement, a sign that her hard work didn't go unseen. Days like that made her realize how much she respected him, not only as her boss but also as a person. She admired his dedication, his balance between firmness and kindness, and the way he carried his responsibilities without complaining. And each time he spoke about his child in casual conversations, she was reminded of the first time she had seen him, the father in the park, smiling when his little boy laughed. One evening, she finally found the courage to bring it up. They were the last two in the office again, finishing up different tasks. The silence between them felt comfortable, and she decided this was her chance. "Can I ask you something?" she said hesitantly. He looked up from his papers. "Of course." She took a breath. "Do you remember a day in the park, a while ago? Your child dropped a toy, and someone handed it back." For a second, his expression was blank, as though he was searching his memory. Then slowly, his eyes lit up with recognition. A soft laugh escaped his lips. "That was you." She smiled, relieved. "Yes. I wasn't sure if you remembered." "I can't believe it," he said, shaking his head in surprise. "I remember that day clearly, but I never connected it to you. Life really is strange, isn't it?" She nodded. "It is. I thought about it many times but didn't know if I should mention it." He leaned back in his chair, still smiling. "So, the person who saved my son's favorite toy turned out to be one of my best employees. That's quite a story." They both laughed softly, and the air between them shifted in that moment. The unspoken connection that had been quietly growing now had a beginning, a shared memory that linked their lives in an unexpected way. From that day on, their conversations became more natural, more personal. They still kept professionalism in the office, but there was an added warmth, a layer of trust built on something beyond work. She walked home that night with a smile she couldn't hide. The memory of the park no longer felt like a private secret, it was now a story they both shared. And though she didn't know where life would take them from here, she knew one thing for certain: sometimes the smallest acts could create the biggest changes. The bond between them was no longer just about work. It was about respect, trust, and a connection that life had quietly built piece by piece. After that evening when they both laughed about the park incident, things quietly changed between them. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would draw the attention of others, but the way they interacted became warmer. There was now a shared memory, a private story that belonged only to them, and it added a new layer to their connection. He was still her boss, and she was still careful to remain professional, but she could not deny that she felt closer to him than before. At work, he continued to trust her with important responsibilities. When there were meetings with clients, he sometimes asked her to join. When projects required new ideas, he often turned to her first. She realized he was no longer testing her, he was depending on her. That realization gave her pride but also made her more determined never to disappoint him. She worked harder, not just because she wanted to grow in her career, but also because she respected him and wanted to justify the trust he placed in her. One afternoon, during a challenging project, she was asked to prepare a detailed presentation for a major client. The entire team was under pressure, but she had been given the lead. She spent nights going over every detail, building slides, checking data, and rehearsing her delivery. On the day of the presentation, she stood at the front of the room, her hands steady, her voice clear. As she spoke, She saw him watching from the corner of the room, his eyes calm but focused. She drew strength from that presence. Every time she glanced at him, it reminded her that he believed in her. When the presentation ended, the clients applauded the clarity of her work. Later, as they left the room, he walked beside her and said simply, "Excellent job. That's the kind of leadership we need." Those words stayed with her, giving her the quiet assurance that she was growing, not just as an employee but as someone who could truly make a difference. Outside of work, their conversations became a little more personal. During late evenings in the office, when most people had already left, they sometimes talked about life beyond the company. He told her small stories about his child, the funny things he said, the mischief he caused, the joy he brought. She listened with genuine interest, smiling at the warmth in his voice when he spoke as a father. In return, she sometimes shared stories about her own family, her struggles, and the lessons she had learned along the way. One evening, while walking out of the building together, he said something that stayed in her heart for a long time. "You know, the day in the park, it may have been a small moment for you, but for me, it meant a lot. My son was very attached to that toy. If it had been lost, he would have cried all day. I was distracted that day, tired from work, and I didn't even notice it fell. You saved us from a very long, difficult evening." She looked at him with surprise. "I never thought of it like that. To me, it was just a small act." He smiled. "Sometimes small acts carry more meaning than we realize." That simple conversation deepened her respect for him even more. It reminded her that kindness, no matter how small, could touch lives in ways unseen. She felt grateful that fate had allowed her to cross paths with him in such an unexpected way. As months passed, her role in the company grew stronger. She was no longer the quiet new employee, she was now recognized as a key member of the team. Colleagues came to her for advice, and her name was mentioned in important discussions. Through it all, he continued to support her, guiding her when needed but also giving her the space to shine. One day, after a successful project launch, the company held a small celebration. Everyone was cheerful, congratulating one another, sharing light moments. In the middle of it all, she noticed him standing quietly near the side, smiling as he watched his team celebrate. She walked over and said softly, "You should join in. Everyone is happy because of your leadership." He chuckled. "It's their hard work that brought this success. My job is just to guide." She shook her head gently. "Your job is much more than that. You bring out the best in people. Even in me." For a moment, he looked at her, and there was something in his eyes, something unspoken but full of meaning. Then he smiled and said, "And you've proven that the best leaders often start as the ones who are willing to pick up small things, even if it's just a toy in a park." Her heart warmed at those words. She realized he had not only remembered that day, but he had connected it to who she had become in the workplace. It was a reminder that small beginnings could lead to life-changing journeys. In time, she grew more confident, not just in her role but in herself. She stopped doubting her abilities and started trusting her instincts. She knew part of this change came from her own hard work, but part of it also came from his faith in her. He had seen potential in her when she was still new and uncertain, and that belief had pushed her to grow. Looking back, she often thought about how differently life could have turned out if she hadn't noticed that toy on the ground, or if she had simply walked past without stopping. It amazed her how such a small decision to bend down and pick up a child's toy had unknowingly set her on a path that changed her life. One evening, as she was leaving the office, she paused for a moment and looked back at the building. She thought of the journey she had taken, from the nervous girl who entered on her first day to the confident woman she had become. She thought of the man who had been a stranger in the park and was now not just her boss, but someone she deeply respected, someone whose presence had shaped her future. Life, she realized, was full of hidden connections. Sometimes, the people who were meant to change our lives crossed our paths in the most ordinary ways. A smile, a word, or a small act of kindness could be the beginning of something we could never predict. And so, her story was not just about a job, or about success in the workplace. It was about how destiny sometimes works quietly, weaving people's lives together in ways they don't understand at first. It was about how a single toy, slipping from a child's hands, had led her to discover not only a future she had been searching for but also the strength within herself she never knew she had.